All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our July Extension Master Gardener webinar. Before I introduce our speaker this morning, there are just a few things to cover. If you have questions for our speaker, please type them in the chat box, and we're going to get to as many of those as we can at the end of the session here today. And all of our Extension Master Gardener webinars are recorded and are posted to our webinar archive on our EMG website. We will post that link in the chat box for everyone to take a look at in case you've missed past webinars. Now to our speaker this morning, Jamie King. Jamie is the campus arborist at Virginia Tech and is responsible for the overall planting, health, care, safety, and general maintenance of trees on campus. Before his role as the campus arborist at Virginia Tech, Jamie worked as the city arborist for the city of Roanoke for over 7 years. Welcome, Jamie. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Oh, thank you, Kathleen. It's a pleasure. Just some clerical stuff. My screen is visible. Can everybody see the first slide? Can you hear me? Great. Okay. Hello, America. Hello, Virginia. Hello, Master Gardeners. Thank you for the introduction, Kathleen. I think you covered it pretty well. I am the arborist at Virginia Tech. What does that mean? Well, I take care of all the trees here, or try to. I did do, I've only been here for about 8, maybe 10 months now. And before that, I was the city arborist in the city of Roanoke. And a lot of the photos you'll see today are from that work. And a lot of the excellent people I worked with there. So today we'll talk about urban forestry, what it is, what it does for people, and how you may be able to be involved. You see the title there, Urban Forestry as a Public Service. I personally have always felt drawn to public service. I want to help the world be a better place for all the people out there. And I've found that trees are really good at that. Trees, I like trees, and I mostly like them because trees are good for people. And we'll talk a little bit about that too. So I think Kathleen said, yeah, if you have any questions, please send them in, and because this isn't a long presentation. And at the end, I'll be able to answer them, I hope. So, whoops. There it is. Got all this junk on my desktop. So on this slide, you'll see some of the different things that trees have to deal with to live and to provide all the services that we value and care about. And so on the left of the screen, you'll see a large tree being removed. That tree had become dangerous. It's in you can see a pretty tight space here on campus at Virginia Tech. And I had to make a really hard decision on whether that tree was safe enough to be there, and ultimately determined that it was not. And we had to do all sorts of scheduling and budgeting to make that space safe for the people that live, work, and learn here at Virginia Tech. The photo to the right of that at the top of the screen is an interesting way that I saw in another city that they've created a space for a tree to grow, but also accommodated foot traffic near it. I think that's a really neat way to do that. And then below that, that's a photograph from downtown Asheville, North Carolina, where they've created a really beautiful space with trees and outdoor dining and commerce where people can come and gather and communicate and be together, which I'm sure we're all missing these days. And those trees add a lot to that space. And so each of those trees needs to be managed by somebody who knows things about trees, who tries to know things about people, and ultimately manages a tree population in a city to its greatest benefit. And that's what urban forestry is. We plan, we maintain, and we use intensive measures to maintain trees and provide them for the public. So the foundation of urban forestry is arbor culture. So that's a specialization of horticulture, and it's the art and science of tree care. So it's a fairly new science. People have been working with trees, appreciating trees, managing trees for as long as people and trees have been around. But you know, in the 50s and 60s, we started to specialize away from traditional forestry and think about trees as individuals versus the forest environment. So we implement you know, plant health care techniques, pruning techniques, and planning to manage trees individually as part of a larger urban canopy and population, and provide those trees, that urban canopy, that population to the public for the benefits they provide. That's a photograph of young students here at Virginia Tech learning how to do what's called tree risk assessment. And it's been a real pleasure to be able to help out with those classes. I was once one of those students, and it's been a lot of fun here. I kind of miss my old job in the city of Roanoke, but being with the students is really rewarding. So arborists care for trees. We plant trees, we prune trees. This is a very skilled arborist. This is Mr. Jeff Inman, a friend of mine and an excellent professional, using ropes and climbing techniques to access the crown of a tree above ground to provide it with the pruning it may need to make it safe, to help it avoid conflicts with infrastructure or other trees, or help it with its health. So who's seen a root-bound plant like that before? We all have, right? So these are a couple friends of mine in the city of Roanoke working with the Roanoke Tree Stewards, an all-volunteer group that cares for public trees. And they're taking a plant, I think that may be a saucer magnolia, if I remember correctly, that has been root-bound in a pot, pruning those roots. And then in the bottom left hand of the screen, you'll see Mr. Bobby Lyon, an excellent tree steward in the city of Roanoke, inserting that tree into what's called a Missouri gravel bed. And those roots that they pruned away will be fed water in that loose medium of the gravel throughout the growing season and create a new, healthier root system. So this is a way that in arboriculture we've determined and found out how to manipulate the tree's growing system to take something that wasn't so great before and make it even better than it was before the tree was root bound. So another aspect of urban forestry beyond the arboriculture is it requires political and public engagement. So trees belong to the public, they serve the public, and that puts it in the government's realm for management, for budgeting. And on the right side of the screen, you'll see a really useful software called iTree that we can use to calculate the monetary benefits that trees provide to the public. We can take an inventory of trees in communities, on properties, and use this model to actually assign that population with a structural value, the value of the trees themselves, and how much it would cost to replace them. We can determine the value of the carbon those trees sequester every year. We can determine the dollar value of the stormwater those trees mitigate. We can determine the dollar value of the energy those trees save for the public. So that's one way to engage the political mechanism in towns and cities and states all across the country. And it's proven effective because governments are organizations that manage money for the public. And when we're able to take something like a tree population and determine its value, it makes it directly comparable to other services. Now, that doesn't mean it's the only way to value trees, but it is an effective way that we found that works. The other part of that, beyond the political engagement, is the public engagement. So I had mentioned the amazing people in the city of Roanoke that volunteer their time with the Roanoke Tree Stewards. They are, some of them are master gardeners, some of them are master naturalists, some of them are people who have specialized just in tree knowledge and tree care, but all of them want to make their communities better. And I'll tell you, while I love my job here at Virginia Tech, I really do miss the Roanoke Tree Stewards, and I really value the time that I still have to spend time with them and work. So that's the Roanoke Tree Stewards are an example of an organization that can help urban foresters, arborists, city managers, the people who manage the trees, teach the public about trees. That on the left, you'll see like a weeknight presentation where the tree stewards are teaching the public. Or in the middle there, that was a large planting day a couple years ago. It was a major accomplishment. I think we planted, on a real cold winter day, we planted 25 trees in a city park. And then on the right there, that's, some of you may know him, that's Mr. Carl Absher, teaching a family about the American chestnut. So one of the best things we can do for trees as tree managers or people that care about trees is tell other people about how important trees are for us and the future. Another way to engage the public, the political apparatus, and the whole world around us is by hosting educational events. So on the left there, that's Roanoke Tree Stewards. That's David Edwards and Harry Van Gilder and Bobby Lyon measuring a tree to determine its value, so then we could use that number to promote the trees in Roanoke. And that was a really fun project. In the center there, you'll see that was an educational day that we hosted for other professionals in the field, where we were actually treating American elm trees for Dutch elm disease, preventing that destructive disease and preserving the trees. And then on the right there, that's a good friend of mine and a good community advocate in Roanoke, Jeff Manning, who was and you'll see above him one of his employees up in the tree. We were working with the Roanoke Tree Stewards that day to learn about trees and prune trees at the Mill Mountain Zoo. So we've talked about management, and we've talked a little bit about political and public engagement, but long-term planning supports the trees of the future. So we've got to plan space for trees to be in the future. We've got to plan the populations that we're going to be managing and appreciating in the future. And all of that started a long, long time ago when Dr. Carl Schenk came over from Germany to start the first forestry school in America at the Biltmore Estate. And I tell this story because I admire Carl Schenk and the foundation he built for the profession of forestry and the traditions that we still hold today regarding trees, tree management, and all across the country. And in that painting on the right, that's a representation of Carl Schenk. He had an impressive mustache. And you'll see when he arrived to America, people were harvesting trees. They were managing them to some degree. And in the North Carolina mountains, similar to the mountains here in Virginia, what they would do is fell the tree, take the limbs off of it, and pile them all up in a valley. And then they would dam the stream above that valley and create a reservoir. And when it came time to take those logs down to town or commerce, railroads, rivers, they would break the dam, and the water would rush laden down with all those logs and destroy property all throughout its path. It was a very unsustainable method of forest harvest and transport. So when Carl came over from Germany, where the practice of silvics and forestry was beginning to become a science, he said, well, you can't do this. We need to build roads. That's planning. If we want to harvest these trees for now, for the future, if we want to enjoy forests for now, for the future, for future generations, we've got to lay the groundwork, build the roads, build the bridges to allow us to have trees, to use them, to enjoy them, and provide them for future generations. So that may be a cumbersome way to explain the concept, but I think it works pretty well. So that's on the left there, that's the Pisgah National Forest. That is the first national forest in the country. That all of that land was once owned by the Vanderbilts, and that's where forestry began. It's a nice place. And then next to that, that's my wife, next to the North Carolina State Champion Perodia, which is an exotic tree, but a very useful one. And that's a really impressive one. It's the largest one I've ever seen. It's an example of a tree that was planted, cared for, planned for a long time ago that we're able to enjoy today. So the trees we plant and manage today serve future generations. So this is an example of a project that I did in the past, and in the city of Roanoke, and in a lot of communities all across the country and the world. Every year, a tree is cut down and moved to a town center and celebrated as a Christmas tree. And that's an unsustainable practice. Large trees are valuable if they're healthy and safe and can remain in space. That's a good thing. And planting a tree, one that can be enjoyed for generations, is a much more sustainable practice. So in coordination with different community groups, we were able to plant a permanent Christmas tree in downtown Roanoke where it could be appreciated and celebrated in the future, and maybe prevent the removal of trees for that celebration for future generations. So urban forestry requires ethic, expertise, leadership, and planning. And so this is where I talk about ethic. Long time ago, maybe not so long ago, a very famous scientist named Aldo Leopold finally wrote down an idea that he had and that a lot of other people had, and he illustrated the concept of land ethic. So land ethic is our responsibility as people to consider the land as a community that we are part of as we enjoy it, as we manage it. And we need to be able to, make decisions that consider all possible possibilities, all possible stakeholders, the microbiome in the soil, all the different flora and fauna that may be involved, and make the best decision that we can for us, for the land, but also for the future. So that expertise part, that's the Arbor Culture or the public administration part of urban forestry. It takes practice. It takes quite a lot of coordination, leadership. So as an arborist, as an urban forester, as a master gardener, as a tree steward, we can lead the public by helping them understand trees and all the amazing things trees do for us without ever asking for our help. And then the long-term planning. We've got to think about what's going to happen in the future and how we can make space for trees to be structurally sound, healthy, and sustainable for generations to come. So this is a couple other pretty pictures. So those are a bunch on the top left. That's a bunch of students who that was a field day we hosted where they all learned about the different sectors of arboriculture and urban forestry and how they may be able to find work and fulfillment in their lives in this field. And there's Jeff Inman again, climbing a truly incredible white oak in the city of Roanoke. And then if any of you have ever been to downtown Roanoke, you may have seen Century Plaza, which is a wonderful place to enjoy fall colors. These ginkgos create a really nice alley, and it's a nice park. And again, another example of an idea that happened a long time ago that someone decided was the right thing to do. So that's leadership. It can be ethical or not. And then they planned the space and then used their expertise as designers and arborists to create that space for our enjoyment. And here's the last slide. There is a contrast between perception and reality. Then the larger photo there, you'll see a couple of foresters out in the forest using a crosscut saw. And when I first started studying urban forestry, I would tell my friends and family, I'm learning all this stuff about urban forestry, and they'd say, "Isn't that an oxymoron?" I said, no, we have trees in cities and they have to be managed, and it's related to traditional forestry, but it's a little bit different. So we don't get the opportunity to use crosscut saws like that very often, but we have bucket trucks and chainsaws, and in that top right photo, you'll see an arborist working on a project in the city to remove a tree that had become unsafe. So it's a little bit different, but it's still related. And then the last photo, that's a family and friends planting a tree for the future. So those are that's my presentation. And I think I'll stop sharing the screen now and take questions if we have time.
We do. Great. Thank you so much, Jamie. If anybody has questions, we haven't gotten any so far, so please go ahead and type those into the chat box. We can wait just a minute or two if you get those questions queued up. In the meantime, Jamie, do you want to share a little bit about your work on campus and what you're doing as the campus arborist? Because if I'm correct, that is a new position, right?
That's right. So, okay, can everybody see me? All right. For about 150 years at Virginia Tech, we have enjoyed the trees here on campus. Various generations of students and teachers and community have experienced the campus. And throughout that whole time, there had a lot of things aligned, and eventually we hired an arborist to take care of those trees. And I'm happy to be here. People say I'm the first one. There were arborists that worked here before, and we have a really incredible urban forestry program in the College of Natural Resources and Environment. That's where I went to school. Indeed, a lot of people in our field that have pursued higher education went to Virginia Tech. So we have had a lot of knowledge on campus, but there has been a kind of a void of leadership to take initiatives like tree preservation, routine maintenance, all those different things, and kind of house them within one office. So a large part of what I've been doing is getting to know the campus. While I was a student here, I was focused on other things. And while I appreciated the trees, I was not necessarily planning for their maintenance or avoiding risk, planning for future planting projects, things like that. So I'm getting to know the canopy. And through that process, we've found out that Virginia Tech has about a 14.3% urban tree canopy. So what does that mean? Well, the trees cast shade. And when we look at the trees from above, like we would with Google Maps or an aerial view, the percentage of land that is covered by trees, we can call the urban tree canopy. And generally, kind of a guideline for a healthy urban forest in our part of the world, 40% would be a desirable urban canopy. So we do have a deficit. We have a lot of growth to fill. We've got a lot of opportunities to have more trees, to provide even more services to the public and to the students and everybody that appreciates the campus. In that same process, I was lucky enough to inherit a tree inventory. That inventory consists of about 10,000 trees. It changes. We plant trees, we lose trees, these things happen. And through that process, the trees were identified by their location and their species and their size. And we found out we have some vulnerabilities. That we have way too many maples. It's important to have a diverse population that's resilient to pests and disease. While we're facing the emerald ash borer right now, I have to plan for the future and know that the Asian longhorn beetle may probably will be here in some indeterminate amount of time. And if we have a lot of maples, if we have a lot of trees that are vulnerable to that pest, then we'll lose them like we're losing the ash trees now. So that's one part of what I've been doing. The other part is writing a master plan. The master plan will guide us, set that tree canopy goal that I mentioned earlier, dictate what trees can be planted and of what species and where, things like that. So I'm really taking a broad approach of municipal forestry, urban forestry, and managing the trees here on campus like a city. And because it is a city, we've got shops, we've got homes, we've got places that people work. This is a dense population of people in a location. So it's urban forestry.
All right, we have had some questions come in. So kind of on your job, I guess maybe both jobs that you've held as the city arborist in Roanoke and then also on campus, how much of your job involved educating homeowners on their trees, if any?
A large part. So being a public tree manager, I do have to draw a line where I can't give specific advice on a person's tree. But the education part is, if you have a tree question, if you have a concern, if you want to learn more about your trees, please call an ISA certified arborist. And if any of you out there are in need of one, you can go to treesaregood.org and you can put in your zip code and it'll show you the certified arborist in your location. So certified arborists are able to provide you with the expertise you need to make good decisions for your trees. In Roanoke, working with the Roanoke Tree Stewards and other community groups, we were able to educate the public through the media, through my personal work and visiting people on their front porches, which I do miss a lot. I was able to talk to people about trees, but not necessarily their own.
Great. What are the biggest challenges for the future of urban forestry?
Climate change, global warming is moving tree zones. We can expect warmer conditions in pretty much every locale, and that changes what trees can live in spaces. And people in the know are already beginning to change the species that they spec for planting, because when we plant a tree, we're planting a legacy that can last generations, and understanding how the climate is changing is important so that we can know that that tree we're planting today will be able to handle temperatures in the future. Storms and extreme weather events are likely to become more frequent, and that affects the urban canopy pretty drastically. Beyond that, global commerce has led to a lot of invasive pests and disease. While we know the famous ones like chestnut blight and Dutch elm disease and emerald ash borer, there are more out there. And as we move products and people across the world, the trees are vulnerable to infection by disease and infestation by insects. So those are the big challenges, but we've got quite a lot of opportunities too. There are more people interested in trees than there have been in the past. People are more politically involved. I think those are the big things that, we all, if we care about trees, we have to speak for them. And that our opportunities are dependent on us letting the government and all of our friends and neighbors know that trees matter.
That kind of leads into this next question from Pamela. Where does one begin with a city that maybe doesn't have appropriate trees and that might have to top them to accommodate vehicles or wires or things like that? So where do you start if your city might not have an arborist or that you're interested in advocating for those trees?
Absolutely. So any city or town large enough to have a public works department has probably an engineer who's in charge of that department. And I have found great support in the engineering field. Engineers that work for the public want to know more about what you need and how they can do their jobs better. And simply by arranging a meeting or a Zoom call with the director of public works or a public works manager in your town to talk about how trees are being managed and how they may be managed in the future. That's a place to start. If that doesn't work, city councils, city managers, mayors, all of these people are there to serve you. And if you go and talk to them about trees, they will find out how trees are being managed and how they may be done better.
Another question that came in your opinion, which trees are good to recommend for people or developers installing new suburban developments? We see a lot of crepe myrtles and pear cultivars and all of those kind of things. Do you have recommendations for better species?
Well, in science, the answer is always it depends. But generally, we can, there are different, trees provide many services, be it aesthetic value, shade, stormwater mitigation, all of these different things. But ultimately, and there's a really good paper that recently came out by Dr. Nowak, a long-lived large tree that can tolerate the local environment, particularly the soil conditions on site. And at a new development, those soil conditions are going to be challenging. A large tree that can tolerate all of those things, that lives a long time, provides the greatest return on investment over time. So that sounds simple, but we have to know where the tree is going to be planted. It has to be established in the landscape. It has to be managed over time. As far as species go, a lot of cities face high alkaline soil problems. So trees that are tolerant of high pH, those are good candidates. Trees that are tolerant of drought and high heat in the urban environment will perform better over time, provide better service, and be less of a burden on a maintenance program. Um, I'm guessing there's probably some questions about native species in the chat room. And in an urban environment, native species can be a great thing to have, but are not always the best selection. Because we've created an urban environment that is not as similar to the native environment, like the forest floor, they may not have those tolerances to full sun, high heat, reflective heat off the pavement, and drought and other really taxing environmental stresses. Some do. I love catalpa trees. They grow really well in the city. They have a bad reputation because they're kind of messy and people still think of them as weedy, but they grow fast and they're very valuable and they're native, so they're great.
How is urban forestry different around the country? Can you talk about best practices, whether they're done here in Virginia or elsewhere around the country?
So that's a really interesting question. And in the 70s, when urban forestry was kind of first becoming a profession and a sector, a famous guy I think he was deputy director of the Department of Agriculture, big wig in USDA. He had a keen interest in urban forestry, but he made a decision that has set the tone for urban forestry across the nation, which is that urban forestry would be funded and managed individually, independently by localities. So that has led to a couple different things, one of them being a lack of leadership from the federal government. So we have different ways of managing trees in every locality across the country. So luckily, we're able to, as a profession and as professionals, we have standards, and those are beginning to be implemented by the best programs throughout the spectrum. But also, it's created kind of a deficit for funds. So some places are funded better than others. You know, a small town won't have the money it needs to maintain trees well sometimes, where some towns will. So those are a couple things. Generally, the west side of this country, the West Coast, has culturally a better appreciation of trees than say the Northeast or the Southeast. That's a generalization. It's not necessarily fair, but it has proven true. There is a great tradition of tree management in the Northeast, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New York. And it's kind of where the profession started, the tree wardens. So every locality has an elected or appointed official called a tree warden. And in the early 1900s, these individuals were responsible with deciding what happens with trees on public property and sometimes private property as well. And that tradition has continued into now and kind of set the example for town urban foresters and city arborists. That is not common across the country, but it's a really neat difference between those localities and others.
I'm kind of continuing with the localities, but from the country back down to Virginia specifically. Does Virginia have any laws or regulations for cities that remove trees regarding replacing those trees? This individual city widening drainage ditches and removing the trees near that widening project. They were hoping that the city might replant the trees, but it has been 2 years and they have not. So are you aware of any laws or regulations for cities removing trees?
So it is by locality. Most cities should have a tree policy and a tree ordinance. Some don't, most do. That ordinance may include required mitigation for tree removal. It may not. A lot of Northern Virginia is doing a pretty good job on public property. That's probably Northern Virginia and the East Coast of this state are probably the most vulnerable to development, to highly urbanized environments. And some of those places have really great urban forestry programs. Fairfax County is one of the best in the country, but some of them have room for improvement. Sorry, somebody came into the office. And so that's just one example. It really depends. If you have a question, if you saw that happening, I would definitely try to find out if you have a city arborist, an urban forester, a city arboriculturalist. If you have if you can't get in touch with anybody directly involved, call the mayor.
Great, thanks. The next question is, as extension master gardeners, they get a lot of questions about conflicts that can arise when trees are overhanging property lines or have limbs that appear to be at risk of falling, or maybe clients who are fearful of having a tree come down in the wind. Any words of wisdom that our master gardeners can give clients who come in with some of these tree questions?
Call an arborist. That's always the best thing to do. As far as limbs over property lines in Virginia, there's a state law where you do have the right to cut vegetation at the property line. That being said, and I used to deal with this a lot in the city of Roanoke, best to talk to your neighbor first, come to a decision together, hire an arborist to do the work. As far as tree risk goes, some things are evident. If a tree is actively failing, call an arborist. If a dead limb is over something important or vulnerable, call an arborist. So that common sense goes a long way. With plant health and tree structure, you've got to have a certain level of expertise to make the right decision. But generally, I think most people can see something that's going to happen that needs to be taken care of quickly.
I think that's a really good message for everybody to take home. Do you have any recommended short videos, presentations, publications that people could show city leaders to help show them or convince them of the critical role of urban trees and the roles performed by urban foresters?
Absolutely. So there's this. So earlier I talked about the lack of leadership from the federal government, and I may have been a little harsh. There is a pretty great program called the Vibrant Cities Lab. And if I remember, I'll try to send Kathleen a link so we can share it with everybody. That I think is funded through the United States Forest Service. And that website shows exactly how and where to begin to engage the public about trees, engage your government about trees, and it actually creates a roadmap for cities to begin to take trees serious. Should have thought of that earlier when we were talking about how to start. But that website has all kinds of resources, links to research, videos, everything.
Great, that's really helpful. And I just pulled up that website and have copied the link homepage into the chat box so everybody can take a look at that. Someone else asked a couple of the other sources that you mentioned here today. One of them was maybe Trees Are Good, or was that it?
Yeah, treesaregood.org.
Oh, and are there any others that you think folks should know, either in their own learning and knowledge about trees or in advocating to their clients or city officials?
I think those will link you to many other resources. So I think those are two good places to start.
Okay. The last question we have here, and again, if anybody else has questions, we do still have a few minutes, so please feel free to put them in the chat box. But it does have to do with native species and native trees. Do you know if there's any push in the arboriculture industry to include more of those native species, especially in terms of supporting biodiversity?
Absolutely. So just now, Virginia Tech is building or planning to build a campus in Alexandria, Virginia. Alexandria has a very good urban forestry program, and they have a tree ordinance that requires native trees on development. And so there's a lot. But I'll tell you, since we're reviewing those design plans now, and that restriction, I'll call it a restriction, has good intentions, but it can make planning an urban forest on this site challenging, because some native trees are not well suited for parking lots. That's just, I won't harp on that anymore. But so that's another example. There are different private companies that make their living off of suggesting and helping you plant native trees all across the country. There's a lot of movement, but it's a complex situation. We manage tree populations, and we have to think about everything that's available.
Great, thank you so much. It looks like we don't have any other questions in, so I think that concludes our session for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Jamie. This was a lot of really great information that I hope everyone will be able to take back to their own cities and localities, and maybe have a little bit of a greater appreciation for their urban canopy and the trees that they might see in their own backyard or on walks. And so I really appreciate your time, and thank you all for joining us today. We had a lot of really great questions, so I appreciate you taking the time to put those in. Again, this has been recorded and will be posted to our webinar archive that I posted at the very top of the chat box. And it should be up within the next day or so. So feel free to share with any other Master Gardeners who might not have been able to join us today. And with that, I think we are finished. So thank you so much again, Jamie, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
It's been a pleasure. Bye, everybody.